Different organizations have different appetites for getting preview features. Some organizations participate in the Windows Insider or Office Insider programs, for example. Same kind of idea here. Do you want your users to be more on the leading edge and looking at preview features before they're generally available? Or are you more comfortable just waiting for the general availability release of new Teams features? Your choice. And the commandlet to assign a custom update policy, which could be to certain users, not your entire team necessarily, is the set CS Teams update management policy commandlet. You can also assign this policy, as you can see in the screenshot, from the Teams Admin Center. There are team templates we can use. So every time we're spinning up a team, we don't have to step through the same choices with the risk of making a different selection than we wanted. No, we can templatize deployment for, let's say we have a project team. We always need the same resources. We can do this with templates. Now, not all properties of a team template are available to templatize at this point, but most of them are, which saves you time and gives you consistency as you spin up new teams, including things like the presence or absence of particular channels, tabs, and apps. We can start tabula rasa or start with an existing template and modify it. We've got some flexibility there. Now, I'll show you how to prepare Teams admin roles and licenses. We'll look at various Teams management tools. I'll show you how to create groups and teams in different ways, and then how to implement some of the lifecycle management and governance choices you'll need to make for Microsoft Teams.
Our first order of business is to assign various Teams roles to different users. To do that, I'll log in as the Microsoft 365 admin. I'll go into my M365 Admin Center. In the navigation pane on the left-hand side, I'll choose Users. And Active Users. Looking for Joni Sherman. I'll select her username, which will reveal the settings pane on the right-hand side. I'll click Manage Roles and Admin Center Access. I'm going to show all by category and choose Teams Administrator and save changes. In a similar way, for Patty Fernandez, I will assign Patty the Teams Device Admin role. And then the Teams Communication role I will assign to Alan DeYoung. Correction, I will assign the Teams Communication Support Engineer role to Alan DeYoung. And save changes. Now check the license assignment of Alex Wilbur. Very important to get the correct country for license assignment. So I'll go into Alex's License and Assignments tab. Correction, I'll go into Alex's Licenses and Apps tab and then choose Canada as a location and save changes. And we can see that Alex is licensed for the EMS E5 and O365 E5 licenses. And we can see that Microsoft Teams is among the other apps licensed as well. So now we're ready to work with teams. I'll open a private browser and sign in to the Teams Admin Center as Joni Sherman. From the left navigation, under Teams, I'll choose Manage Teams. Shows the teams in our organization. Right now, there's an early adopters team, and that's it. Next up is Teams Policies. We can see a global org-wide default team. We'll be exploring the other settings as we go through the demos today and tomorrow. Now I'll install and explore the Teams PowerShell module. Running as admin. Make the font bigger here for legibility. So to take advantage of the Microsoft Teams commandlet, first I need to install the Teams PowerShell module. I do that with the install module commandlet, specifying the name of Microsoft Teams. And I'll say yes to acknowledge the untrusted repository. And NuGet provider. Now I'll connect into my Teams tenant with the Connect Microsoft Teams commandlet. I'll authenticate as Joni Sherman. And now we see some info about the signed in user and the tenant. Next up, we'll explore the Microsoft Teams PowerShell module. We'll run the get module command. This should return a list of modules, and it does. We can see the version number of the PowerShell modules on the left-hand side. Let's get an overview of the available Teams PowerShell commandlets. We'll run the get command, specifying the Microsoft Teams module. So again, we've installed correctly. Let's say we want information about how to create a team with PowerShell. For that, we'll use get help with the new team commandlets. And we'll update the libraries. To get the most current help files. And now several examples appear about the new team commandlet. Also some links and other remarks. Now we'll disconnect from our team session. Now let's create some groups in teams, starting with a Microsoft 365 group. To do that, from the Admin Center, we'll go to the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. Under Teams and Groups, we'll choose Active Teams and Groups. And step through the Add a Group wizard. We'll use a Microsoft 365 group as the default. And the name will be IT Department. We'll include all staff of the IT department. Then we'll assign owners. Joni Sherman will be the owner. Click on Add One and Next. Now we need some members. We'll include Alan, the administrator, MOD administrator, and Patty Fernandez. Add 3 and Next. Group email address will be IT department. Make this a private group. And we won't create a team for this group right now. And next, create group and close. And we can see there's no Teams icon related to the IT department. We'll go into the IT department group to review settings and members. Now let's create a new team using the desktop client. We'll sign in as Alex Wilbur. And we'll sign into this app only instead of allowing the organization to manage my device. And I'll choose Teams. And from the bottom left, join or create a team. Create team from scratch. This will be a public team. And we'll call it Teams Rollout. And create. The team needs some members, so we'll add the usual suspects: Joni Sherman, Lynn Robbins, and this time also Diego Siciliani. And we'll make Joni an owner of the new team. Next up, we will create a new team using the web client. Well, signed in as Lynn Robbins. We'll use the web app instead of downloading the app and choose Join or Create a Team from the lower left. Now we'll create team from scratch. It'll be a private team with a name of Sales. And we'll add a member named Alex Wilbur. Now that we've created teams several ways, let's implement lifecycle management and governance for Microsoft Teams. To do this, we'll go to the Azure Active Directory portal and sign in as the MOD administrator. And from the left nav, we'll choose Azure Active Directory and Groups and Expiration. From the left nav pane, from the left nav pane, we'll choose Azure Active Directory, Groups, and Expiration. Give it a lifetime of 14 days. And we'll specify an email contact for groups with no owners. This will be Joni Sherman yet again. We'll say only selected groups will be enabled for expiration. We'll choose Teams Rollout and save. And save one more time on the group's expiration page. Now we've configured a new expiration policy for Teams Rollout. If the team doesn't have an owner, after 90 days, Joni Sherman will get notified about the expiration. Let's create a group creation policy now. So from the M365 Admin Center, we'll go into Teams and Groups, Active Teams and Groups, and add a group. It'll be a security group. Give it a name of Group Creator. And this is for users who can create M365 groups for new teams. And next, we'll click Create Group and then Close. From the Security tab, we'll choose that newly created group and choose Members. Now we can configure owners and members. The owner will be the MOD administrator. And the members, Joni Sherman and Alex Wilbur. Now we want to restrict the creation of Microsoft 365 groups to the security group just created. We'll do this from within PowerShell. So we'll install the Azure AD Preview module. Select Yes to acknowledge the untrusted repository. Now we'll connect to our Azure AD tenant. As the MOD administrator account. Then we'll load the Azure AD Unified Group template. Now we'll check if an Azure AD setting is already existing and load it if yes. If not, we'll create a blank Azure AD setting object and we'll populate the settings variable. Now we'll modify the group creation setting for our tenant with the Enable Group Creation attribute. Now we'll add the just created security group creators as a permitted group to create groups using their object ID of the group creators group. Now we'll review the changes just configured. You can see the group creation allowed group ID listed there. And we'll save the changes and apply the setting.
Welcome back. We're now going to discuss considerations for granting access to external users, security and compliance
Now
requirements,
we'll test the newly configured
and planning
settings.
and configuring network settings. Because you need to know if your
Signed
existing
in as
network
Alex
can
Wilbur
support
from the
your
Teams
expected
desktop client.
Teams workloads. Let's get started. Let's prepare the environment for a Microsoft Teams deployment.
So we can see
Starting with managing
constrained set of
access
choices
for
there
external
for Alex
users.
Wilbur from the desktop client.
Azure Active Directory is an identity provider, like Active Directory Domain Services is. How they go about their business is completely different. We're not going to get into those distinctions, but we'll talk about some of the features in Azure AD. In other words, the services it provides.
Now we'll
For
revert the
example,
change for enabling
authentication.
users to
So
create new
we
teams.
offer services like
By first
self-service
loading the Azure
password
AD
reset and
unified group
multi-factor
template,
authentication.
creating a blank
There are
Azure AD
business-to-business
settings
capabilities,
object.
so we can manage our guests and external partners while maintaining control over our own corporate data.
And then applying the
There is
configured settings to revert
business-to-customer
previous changes.
capability as well.
Then we'll
So we can
disconnect the current
customize
session
and control how users
using the
sign
disconnect
up,
Azure AD
sign in,
commandlet.
and manage their profiles when using our app.
So we've successfully created a new security
Leveraging
group and
third-party
configured
identity
Azure AD
providers
settings
like
to
Twitter,
restrict the creation of new groups to
Facebook,
members of one
LinkedIn,
group only.
and even Google and
And we tested
Microsoft
the new group
accounts.
creation restrictions.
Conditional access lets us manage access to our cloud apps. More on that
Now we'll
coming up.
configure a new naming
Device
policy.
management lets us manage how our cloud
back into
or
the Azure Active
on-premises
Directory
devices
Admin
access our
Center.
corporate data.
Under Azure Active Directory,
With
we'll choose
hybrid
groups, then
identity,
naming
we can
policy,
use
and
Azure
we're going
AD
to configure
Connect
blocked
and
words.
Azure AD Connect Health to provide
We'll
a
download a
single
sample
user
file
identity for authentication and
and
authorization
open that
to all resources,
blockedwords.csv sample
regardless
file
of
with Notepad.
location, either
We're going to
cloud
enter
or on-prem.
a few items here:
Identity
CEO,
protection
payroll,
lets
and
us
HR.
detect potential vulnerabilities affecting our organization's identities, configure policies to respond to suspicious
Save
actions,
that and then upload
and then
the
take
CSV
appropriate
file
action to resolve them.
by choosing
With
the
managed
Select a
identities
File
for Azure
box.
resources, this provides our Azure services with an automatically managed identity in Azure AD that can authenticate any
Now we'll
Azure
click
AD
Save.
supported authentication service, including Azure Key Vault.
Now we'll configure the group
Privileged
naming
identity
policy.
management lets us manage, control, and monitor access within our organization,
So we'll
including
specify
access
both
to
a
resources
prefix
in Azure
and
AD
a suffix,
and
starting with
Azure
a prefix.
and other Microsoft online services like Microsoft
There'll be a
365
string
and
type.
Intune. With reports and monitoring, we gain insights into the security and
we'll enter
usage
group
patterns
underscore.
in our environment. We can work with external users in Microsoft Teams. Now, these users can be in different categories. So user A is inside our organization. User B is authenticating using
Now we'll add
another
country
Azure
region
AD
as a
account
suffix.
associated with a Fabricam organization. So perhaps Contoso and Fabricam
Type
have
string.
partnered up on a project. Each company is responsible for authenticating their own users, yet a token issued by the partner organization is valid, a valid way of authenticating a user for resource
And
access.
now
in
an
our
attribute, country or region.
User C, we've got a consumer email account, so this could be
And save.
Gmail or Microsoft account.
Now we've configured a naming policy to block
Outlook.com,
specific
Hotmail.
words
User D
when creating
is an
M365
anonymous user,
groups,
so
and
sometimes
also
we
a
want
new
to
naming
give access to our
policy.
resources without requiring any authentication. So this covers the different user
Now we'll
populations
test out
that
the
we
naming
may need
policy.
to access our resources. There's a key
From the Teams
distinction
desktop
between
client,
guest and external access.
scratch,
Guest access
public.
is for individual
Give the
users,
team a name of
whereas if we
after
want
work.
to grant access to multiple people in a different organization, like Fabricam, for example, that's external access. We can list the domain as a trusted domain.
May have to wait a
once,
few minutes
as opposed to
for
worrying
the
about
naming
individually
convention
providing
to
guest
kick in.
access to users in Fabricam. Guests are added to your organization's Azure AD as a B2B user and must sign into Teams using their guest account, which means they may have to first sign out of their own organization to sign into your organization. So in this diagram, a Fabricam
we can
user
see
would have
now
to
the
sign
name
out
after work
of their organization in order to sign in as a
the
guest to the Contosa
prefix
organization.
and suffixes that we specify.
There are several different admin centers you'll need to visit to configure the correct guest user
Also see
access.
this on the left-hand side.
For the Azure AD
Teams
Admin
listing.
Center, we use that to enable guest self-service sign-up. We can establish collaboration restrictions and other
Now we'll
guest
delete the
invite
naming
settings.
policy.
Through the M365 Admin Center, here's where we can let users
concludes this
add
demo.
new guests to the organization. In Module 1, we
allow
explored the
group
Microsoft
owners to add
Teams
people
admin
outside
the
the
organization
PowerShell
to groups
as part of planning and deploying Microsoft
in
Teams.
the
and
Teams
examine
Admin
Teams
Center.
lifecycle
Here's where we
management
can
and
provide
governance.
external access.
We'll now take a
so
10-minute
specifying
break. See
specific
everyone back
domains
here when we
that have
start
access.
Module 2 and learn about
Also, other
preparing the
guest
environment
access
for
settings around
Microsoft
calling,
Teams deployment.
meetings, and messaging. We'll look at some of those options coming up. And what the meetings experience is, if any, for anonymous users. The SharePoint Admin Center is where we can set up external sharing of documents and also file and folder links for sharing. Let's turn our attention to external collaboration settings in Azure AD. Under guest user access restrictions, you have a few choices. Either guest users have the same access as members, this is the most inclusive setting, or guest users have limited access to properties and memberships of directory objects. This is the default. So this blocks guests from certain directory tasks. Number 3 option is guest user access is restricted to properties and memberships of their own directory objects. This is the most restrictive option. With this setting, guests can access only their own profiles. Guests cannot see other users' profiles, groups, or group memberships. The next section pertains to guest invite settings. The most inclusive setting here is anyone in the organization can invite guest users, including guests and non-admins. Another option is member users and users assigned to specific admin roles can invite guest users. Third option is only users assigned to specific admin roles can invite guest users. And the most restrictive option is no one in the organization can invite guest users, including admins. Under Enable Guest Self-Service, sign up via user flows. Select yes if you want users to sign up that way to use apps. And under Collaboration Restrictions, you can choose whether to allow or deny invitations to specific domains. If you're going to allow or deny to more than one domain, enter each domain on a new line. Let's talk managing external access in Teams. You've got some choices. Do you want to have users communicate with other Skype for Business and Teams users and or communicating with other Skype users? And you can have open federation, or you can allow or block specific domains, whichever is the most efficient way to go. Managing guest access in Microsoft Teams. We've got all kinds of slider options here, including, do we want to allow phone calls to guest users? Do we want to allow IP video? Do we want to allow screen sharing and the Meet Now option with guest users? Should guests be able to edit or delete their sent messages? Should guests be allowed to chat? Should they be able to use jiffies or memes or stickers? To manage file sharing in SharePoint and OneDrive, we use the SharePoint Admin Center. Now, these two sliders may look independent, but they're not. So when you move the SharePoint slider, for example, the OneDrive slider eventually moves along with it. Your choices range from the most permissive on top to the most restrictive on the bottom. So the most permissive levels for SharePoint and OneDrive, anyone. So users can share files and folders using links that do not require sign-in. The most restrictive option is no external sharing allowed. Only people in your organization can access the content. And there are some middle options for either new and existing guests or existing guests only. Some other options at the bottom there, you could limit external sharing by domain. In other words, sharing only with certain domains would be allowed. Or you must be a member of one or more security groups to be allowed to share externally. Further, do you want to require guests use the same account that the sharing invitation was sent to access the shared content? Can guests share items they don't own? Another checkbox there. And then, how long should the invitation link last before expiry? Default is 60 days. Next up is implementing security for Microsoft Teams. It's a great idea to use conditional access. You may be familiar with the Zero Trust framework, which is assuming breach. The old security perimeter was the firewall where our resources were inside. Now, with most users having multiple devices, identity becomes the new perimeter. So we need to take advantage of conditional access to make sure we've got the best defense against malicious users. Microsoft processes 8 trillion signals a day. What are some of the signals? Well, they pertain to user behavior and the locations the users are at, or where sign-in attempts were noticed. What device is the user using? What applications are they running on their device? And what applications are they attempting to access? What's the real-time risk? All these signals are processed, and either access is allowed, or perhaps an MFA challenge is issued to the user. So normally they didn't need to use MFA to access a resource. Now they're being asked to use a secondary form of authentication. It could be using the Authenticator app, or a text to their phone, or a voice call to their phone. We could restrict access or the kind of access. In other words, maybe due to real-time risk, now I only have read access to some files which normally I would have read and write access to. I might be issued with a password reset challenge. Maybe my access is monitored. So we have a lot of conditions we could use to decide whether to grant access to a resource, and if so, what kind of access to grant. There are a couple of policy enforcement options here: early bound and late bound policy enforcement. So early bound means a user must satisfy the dependent service policy before accessing the calling app. For example, a user must satisfy SharePoint policy before signing into Microsoft Teams. By contrast, late bound policy enforcement occurs after the user signs into the calling app. Enforcement is deferred to when the calling app requests a token for the downstream service. So, example here, Microsoft Teams accessing Planner and Office.com accessing SharePoint. As a best practice, you should set common policies across related apps and services whenever possible. Having a consistent security posture provides you with the best user experience. For example, setting a common policy across Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, Microsoft Teams, and Skype for Business significantly reduces unexpected prompts that may arise from different policies being applied to downstream services. On the left-hand side of this slide, we have various multi-factor authentication types: FIDO2 security keys, biometrics, tokens can also be used as additional forms of authentication. Safe attachments you might be familiar with from Exchange. It's been around for a while. The idea here is that we can examine attachments in a safe environment such that if they're found to be malicious, no harm is done to the user's device. It's a simple slider in M365 Defender to enable safe attachments. If a file is deemed to be malicious, and let's say in SharePoint or OneDrive, you can see it is classified that way by the red shield next to the file name, as shown on the upper right of the slide. Safe links for Microsoft Teams, the same idea as safe attachments, but applied to web pages now. So in this way, we take advantage of real-time URL scanning, and we can save users from clicking through to malicious websites. Again, in a safe environment, that URL is explored. If it's deemed to be malicious, then the user gets a warning. Now, depending on the settings you configure, you may allow the user to click through to the URL or prevent access from certain populations. Maybe your security administrator does get to click through to explore that malicious website. We can apply a safe links policy using the commandlet new safe links policy or using the portal. We have various security reports we can monitor for Microsoft Teams around categories like identities, data, devices, and apps. We can also get reports on our threat protection status and Threat Explorer. Let's talk compliance for Teams now. So we can come up with our own classification structure to protect organizational data and then apply these labels or even require these labels for different kinds of content like files and emails, groups and sites. And again, they're not built in, so we come up with them. So maybe classified, confidential, PII, non-PII. These are some examples of sensitivity labels you can create. And then you can auto-classify data or have users manually classify content. We can use sensitivity label settings for various groups and sites pertaining to external sharing or access from unmanaged devices. So we can use sensitivity labels as a way to restrict access to certain kinds of information only to organization-issued devices, for example. Retention policies. How long do we want to retain content? It's not one policy fits all. We can get very specific. If you look at the total Microsoft 365 content or other data we've ingested in our Microsoft 365 environment, we can apply the policy just to Exchange public folders or Teams channels, for example, or SharePoint repositories. We've got various retention policy options. Maybe we want to retain the content for a certain period of time. Best to delete it after a certain period of time, but you have a choice there. And different kinds of content we can treat differently with different retention policies. What if we have multiple policies applying to the same content? What is the tiebreaker? Which policy will win out? Well, retention always wins over deletion. And if there's still a conflict in policies, the longest retention period wins. If we have explicit inclusions, they win out. And lastly, the shortest deletion period wins. These principles are only applied in order in case of policy conflicts. Data loss prevention is all about pattern matching. So Microsoft has dozens of built-in patterns pertaining to credit card numbers, passport numbers, social security, driver's license, banking information, routing numbers, and we can create our own custom policies as well, such that when a match is discovered, let's say in an email or an attachment we're attempting to email or share outside the organization, we can be prevented from doing so. Now, depending on the settings, you can allow for the marking of a false positive, and then the user can override the pattern match or not. And we can have policy tips as well. So let's say I'm booking travel and I've pasted in my credit card number into the body of the email. Before I even think of hitting send, I can have a tooltip appear and it tells me, oh, this credit card's detected, that violates DLP policy. And then if the policy is set up this way, I could do an override or not. I'd have to get that credit card number to a travel agency, for example, a different way. Communication compliance policies can assist with reviewing messages in your organization in several important compliance areas. Corporate policies. This is where users must comply with acceptable use, ethical standards, and other corporate policies in all business-related communications. Communication compliance policies detect policy matches and help you take corrective actions to help mitigate these types of incidents. For example, you could scan user communications in your organization for potential HR concerns like harassment or the use of inappropriate or offensive language. Risk management. Organizations are responsible to all communications distributed throughout their infrastructure and corporate network systems. Using communication compliance policies to help identify and manage potential legal exposure and risk can help minimize risks before they can damage corporate operations. For example, you could scan messages for unauthorized communications and conflicts of interest about confidential projects such as upcoming acquisitions, mergers, earnings disclosures, reorganizations, or leadership team changes. In terms of regulatory compliance, most organizations must comply with some type of regulatory compliance standards as part of their normal operating procedures. These regulations often require organizations to implement some type of supervisory or oversight process for messaging that is appropriate for their industry. The FINRA Rule 3110 is a good example of a requirement for organizations to have a supervisory procedure in place to scan user communications and the types of businesses in which it engages. Another example may be a need to review broker-dealer communications in your organization to safeguard against potential money laundering, insider trading, collusion, or bribery activities. Communication compliance policies help your organization meet these requirements by providing a process to both scan and report on corporate communications. With scoped directory search, you can create virtual boundaries. You can prevent different user populations from communicating with each other. The classic example here is a Wall Street brokerage house where you've got your sales side who is not supposed to be communicating with the research division. So you can prevent all electronic communication within Microsoft's world. In other words, if I'm in the sales side and you're on the research side, I cannot add you to a team. I cannot start a chat message. I cannot send you an email or initiate a phone call from within Teams. This is known as an information barrier policy. And once we've got the scope directory, we've subdivided the number of users into different categories, then we can assign information barrier policies to prevent such communication. So first step is to segment users in the organization and then define those information barrier policies and apply them. Each policy is one way only. Notice how in this example, HR can communicate with the investment banker segment and the financial advisor segment, but the investment bankers cannot communicate with the financial advisors. Sometimes we're asked to do e-discovery. Maybe the courts have asked us to produce all communication between person A and person B in a 1-week time frame. So we can do this. We can search across some or all of our M365 corpus looking for the appropriate communications between person A and person B. There are different roles involved in e-discovery. As you can imagine, if someone has access to all the resources across M365, we can't just have anyone do that. So we get to specify certain roles. There's also someone, case manager, that needs to access and coordinate potentially multiple cases ongoing. In fact, the same document or email could be of interest to more than one case. So all that is manageable within e-discovery in M365, including, as you'd expect, all Teams content. Sometimes, besides regular Teams recording, we need to set up compliance recording for WFE. That's workforce engagement, or for security and surveillance, or other compliance and regulatory obligations. The compliance recording solution in Teams enables organizations to automatically record and capture calls and online meetings for later processing and retention. The core component of the compliance recording solution is the recorder. When a communication interaction takes place, the recorders are automatically invited to participate in conversations based on the policies. Users under this policy are aware that their digital interactions with Teams are being recorded, and users cannot disable the recording, and they do not have access to the recording once the interaction is complete. The recording becomes part of the organizational archive and is available to compliance and legal personnel for e-discovery, legal hold, and other corporate retention uses. The exact implementation of the recorder service will vary by provider. We may want to be alerted when security or compliance issues arise, and we have alert policies for this. It could be indicating a security breach, some kind of misuse or attempted misuse of administrative privileges, or other activities that require monitoring. Now, we can see here several tasks that we perform, or a couple anyway, admin tasks. For example, we would create, configure, and turn on an alert policy. And then users are just going about their daily business. And when they do something that matches the conditions of an alert policy, then Office 365 kicks in, generates an alert, and sends an email. The alerts are visible in the Security and Compliance Center, and that's where admins can view and manage those alerts. Optionally, they could be emailed about an action that triggered the alert. Lastly, let's look at planning and configuring network settings for Microsoft Teams. Different kinds of traffic we need to be aware of: data traffic, peer-to-peer real-time traffic, chats, for example, and then conferencing real-time traffic. We need to make sure we have connectivity to Microsoft 365 with minimal hops. So we want to remove VPNs, proxy servers. We must have enough available bandwidth to support the team's workload we anticipate. And you can see some of the network optimization requirements on the right-hand side. We might need to increase our NAT pool size. We want to disable intrusion detection and intrusion protection devices. We may need to configure split tunnel VPN. So again, no VPN to Microsoft 365. Quality of service. Some traffic should be prioritized. We'll have a slide coming up on that shortly. We might need to upgrade our networking equipment, including Wi-Fi routers, and we definitely want to bypass proxy servers. Depending on the video quality we require and the use cases for Teams, we have various personas we can use to help estimate our needed bandwidth requirements. So audio settings, you can see there columns for minimum recommended and best performance. These are bandwidth requirements, so bit rates in kilobytes up and down. Video, one-to-one or meetings. Do we need screen sharing? Are we going to use together mode? So you can see there some minimum recommended and best performance indicators for those different workloads. Thankfully, there's a tool called Network Planner we can use, and we have several personas. So we have to guesstimate based on, let's say, what a salesperson does throughout the day versus an administrative assistant, and then we can come up with some kind of estimate. From that, we may realize, oh, at this location, we need to update our bandwidth, or maybe segment our populations a little differently. Settings we need to enable per persona relate to audio, video, and screen sharing. Is file sharing required? Are we going to need conference audio or conference video and screen sharing? Do we need PSTN access? All these choices affect our total bandwidth usage. There are various ports and protocols that need to be configured as well. Most organizations already have ports 80 and 443 open. There are 60 ports required for real-time media traffic. We're looking at the defaults there from 50,000 to 50,059 inclusive. We can change those port ranges if need be, but they must be back to back to back. Here's the quality of service. So we're going to prioritize real-time traffic, whether it's audio, video, screen sharing. Other kinds of traffic, therefore, is deprioritized because let's say we're sending a Word document. We can always, the Word document does get arranged in correct order, even if the packets arrived out of order. Whereas if video or audio packets arrive out of order, that's going to be suboptimal and lead to confusion. So all your networking equipment must support quality of service. So if you need to upgrade your networking equipment, you have to decide whether that's worth it to you. And we can implement quality of service in the Teams Admin Center. Think of it like quality of service like HOV lanes, but for your network traffic. There is a tool we can use to assess network readiness. So it's an external website we connect to, connectivity.office.com, and then for our various locations, we can see if the network connectivity is good to go, measuring things like packet loss, latency, and jitter. Less is better for all three of those items, and then we can share those connectivity test results as well. And this gives us a per location report on our network readiness. There is a connectivity dashboard we can use and, again, view different cities and different reports. There's a network assessment ranging from 0 to 100, 100 being the best, 80 meets recommendations, even 60 is acceptable. When you get down to 40, then users are definitely going to experience issues. Now I'll show you how to prepare the environment for a Microsoft Teams deployment, including managing guest access, implementing security and compliance, and calculating network capabilities.
Let's review guest access settings from the Azure AD Admin Center. We'll go under Users, User Settings, and then Manage External Collaboration Settings. So we'll see 65 Admin Center. Under Settings, Org Settings, we'll choose M365 Groups under the Services tab, and confirming that the checkbox for Let Group Owner Add People Outside Your Organization to M365 Groups is selected. Under the Security and Privacy tab, we'll choose Sharing. Again, we're confirming that Let Users Add New Guests to the Organization is selected. So we've reviewed guest access settings across different admin centers. Now let's invite guests for collaboration. We'll go to the Teams Admin Center, signed in as Joni Sherman. And under Users, we'll choose Guest Access, confirming that Allow Guest Access in Teams is set to On. Scroll down to the Messaging section, and we will disable Sent Messages. And choose Save at the bottom. Next, we'll add a guest to a team. The Group Afterwork United States team created in the previous demo. Signed in as Alex Wilbur. We will add a member. I set up a Teams demo account for this purpose. And add. Now I'll need to accept the guest invite from my email. And I've chosen Accept to sign into the Teams web client with my Outlook account. And I can see the Afterwork team created earlier. I'll test by sending a message in the general channel. And if I now try and delete the message, I'll see there's no delete option for that message. So now we've successfully invited a guest to the team and validated the guest access setting from the previous task. Let's set up access reviews now. I will go to the Azure AD Admin Center. Signed in as the MOD administrator. I'll create an access review to monitor guest users. Click on All Services and Identity Governance. Create an access review. I'll be reviewing teams and groups, all the M365 groups with guest users, and I'm reviewing guest users only. On the Reviews tab, the reviewers will be group owners. We'll do a weekly review. And just leave the defaults here. Review and create. Now I'll review the Access Review dashboard from Azure AD. Clicking on Review Guest Access across M365 groups. After a few minutes, the status will be active. And I'll select the group name. And we see one user showed as not reviewed. So I can review the access review and approve the guest user. Now I'll browse to outlook.com as Alex Wilbur. Click Review Guest Access and approve. And click Submit. So we successfully created an access review and approved a guest user in the tenant. Next up is implementing security for Microsoft Teams, starting with safe attachments. So go to the Defender portal at security.microsoft.com. Sign in as MOD admin. Under policies and rules, threat policies, safe attachments, global settings, there's a toggle here for turn on Defender for O365, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Microsoft Teams, and save. So we've activated safe attachment scanning. Next up is implementing compliance for Microsoft Teams. So we'll go into PowerShell as an admin and run the connect Azure AD commandlet to connect into our tenant. We'll fetch the current group settings for the Azure AD organization. Then enable the Microsoft Identity Protection support in the configuration. Now we'll verify the new configuration. That's good. And now we will save the changes and apply the settings. Finally, we'll disconnect from our tenant. Next up is creating sensitivity labels for Teams. We'll do this from the Compliance Center, compliance.microsoft.com. Signed in as MOD admin. We'll go to Information Protection in the left nav and turn on to activate content processing in Office online files. Now we'll create the first sensitivity label called General. With the same display name. Description will be general information without protection. That's the user description. There's also an admin description as well, mentioning there's no encryption, marking, or sharing restriction settings activated. The scope will be files and emails and groups and sites. We'll leave default settings here, so no encryption or marking. Leave auto labeling off. We will choose privacy and external user access settings and external sharing and conditional access settings. We'll allow for external access. We're going to do a second sensitivity label now for internal. I jumped the gun there. The label is created. And now creating a second sensitivity label for internal. User description is internal information with sharing protection. And the admin description, internal information with moderate encryption, marking, and sharing restriction settings activated. Again, we'll keep it at files and emails, groups, and sites as the label scope. This time we will choose the encrypt files and emails and mark the content of files checkboxes. We'll configure encryption settings. We'll assign permissions now. And the expiration is never, offline access always. And we'll assign permissions, and we'll choose all users and groups in the organization. For content marking, we'll say yes, and also add a watermark. And add watermark text of internal use only. We'll keep the auto labeling sections as default. In other words, off, and we'll choose both privacy and external user access settings and external sharing and conditional access settings. Here we'll choose none for privacy and external user access settings. And for external sharing and device access settings, we'll choose control internal sharing from labeled SharePoint sites for existing guests and use Azure AD conditional access to protect labeled SharePoint sites and allow limited web-only access. Create label and done. Now we'll create a second sensitivity label of confidential. User description is confidential information with all protection. The admin description, confidential information with all restrictive encryption, marking, and sharing settings activated. Scope, again, files and emails, groups, and sites. We'll choose to encrypt files and emails and mark content of files. We'll configure encryption settings. We'll assign permissions now. Content access expiration is never. Offline access never. And we'll assign permissions, adding all users and groups in the organization. For content marking, again, we'll choose add a watermark. Text will be confidential. No auto labeling. We'll select privacy and external user access settings and external sharing and conditional access settings. Choose private here for the privacy and external user access settings. And we'll control external sharing from labeled SharePoint sites for only people in our organization, and use Azure AD conditional access to protect labeled SharePoint sites. Block access. Create label and done. Now we'll need to publish labels from the top menu. We'll choose sensitivity labels to publish and choose them all and add. Keep the default settings here for users and groups and also for policy settings. For documents, we will choose apply this label by default to documents general. Similarly, for emails, general will be the default for emails. Also for sites and groups. And Power BI content. The name will be All Company Sensitivity Labels. Now we'll create a new retention policy to retain content. So we'll go to the M365 Compliance Center, sign in as MOD admin. From left nav, we'll choose policies, and then under data, choose retention and new retention policy. We'll call it the sales retention policy. We're going to retain messages for 7 years. And various settings for locations, all off except for Teams channel messages. Step through the wizard. And done. Now we'll create a new retention policy to delete content. So policies, we'll choose retention and new retention policy. This is a Teams rollout deletion policy. This is a retention policy for the Teams rollout team to delete messages older than 1 day. Again, applying only to Teams channel messages. So for Teams rollout, hit next, and we're going to delete items when they reach a certain age. Custom, that will be 1 day. Based on when the item was created. Now we've created a second retention policy for testing the deletion capabilities to clean up the Teams rollout team from all conversation messages older than 1 day. Now we'll create a DLP policy for GDPR, personally identifiable information content from a template. So we'll go back to the Compliance Center, choose Data Loss Prevention, Policy tabs, create a policy. We're going to search for specific templates using GDPR. Call it GDPR DLP policy. This is a data loss prevention policy for GDPR regulations in Teams. This will apply to Exchange email, SharePoint sites, OneDrive accounts, Teams chat and channel messages, and Microsoft Cloud App Security. So we're running through a lot of defaults here. Looking for at least one instance of a sensitive info type being shared. We'll specify who should receive the report, and once again, it'll be Joni Sherman. We'll select alerts if any of the DLP rules match, and also restrict access or encrypt content in Microsoft locations. We'll block users from accessing shared SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams content. And we're only going to block people outside the organization, so internal users will continue to have access. And then we'll allow for overriding the rule automatically if it's reported as a false positive. We'll turn it on right away. Submit and done. Now we've created a DLP policy from the template GDPR that detects if GDPR sensitive content is shared with people outside the organization. The policy is extra sensitive for the configured threshold of 1 rule match, and Joni Sherman will be notified if matching occurs. Now we'll create a DLP policy from scratch. Again, from data loss prevention, we'll choose create policy, and we'll choose custom. Call this one credit card data DLP policy. This is data loss prevention policy for credit card data in Teams. Again, we'll apply everywhere listed except for on-premises repositories. We'll create rule. This will be credit card numbers found. The basic rule for protecting credit card numbers from being shared in Teams. We'll add conditions. Content contains. We'll add sensitive information types. Choose credit card number. And add. We'll use the high confidence instance count of 1. Underneath action, we'll choose add an action and restrict access or encrypt content in M365 locations. And we're going to block everyone. So only the content owner, the last modifier, and the site admin will continue to have access. Under user notifications, we'll turn the slider on and customize the policy tip text with credit card numbers are not allowed to be shared. And below incident reports, We'll choose the slider to send an alert to admins when a rule match occurs, and then add or remove people. We'll choose Joni again. And save. Save and next. We'll turn on the rule right away. And submit and done. So now we've successfully created a new custom DLP policy for protecting credit card numbers from being shared via Teams conversations.
In Module 2, we discussed different levels of external access, as well as security and compliance settings for Microsoft Teams. We also looked at crucial network settings you need to know before deploying Teams. We'll now take a 10-minute break. See everyone back here then, when we will finish our Part 1 of the event with Module 3, Manage Chat, Teams, Channels, and Apps in Microsoft Teams. Welcome back from the break. In Module 3, we'll explore several ways of creating and managing teams and different ways we can enable collaboration in Microsoft Teams. Then, we'll look at many ways you can extend the capabilities of Teams using apps. Let's get started. And now, managing chat, teams, channels, and apps in Microsoft Teams. Starting with creating and managing teams. We can create teams from a variety of places. The Teams Admin Center, the Teams Client. If we choose that method, we can create a team from scratch, from a template, or even from an existing group or team. The associated PowerShell commandlet is New Team. And for bulk operations, we can use the Microsoft Graph API. I'll be showing you these methods in the demo. We can create a team from an existing resource. No need to start fresh in Teams. If we have an existing distribution list or a Microsoft 365 group, we can turn that into a team. There is an intermediate step. If we're starting from a distribution list, we convert that to a Microsoft 365 group and then to a team, using either the M365 Admin Center, Teams Client, or even with PowerShell, starting with the commandlet get unified group. Also, we can convert a SharePoint team site to a team. We have org-wide teams up to 5 maximum per tenant with up to 10,000 users in your organization. And as you'd expect, only global admins can create these org-wide teams because they're so wide-reaching. The members include all active users and the owner of the org-wide team, global admins, and Teams administrators. We can create an org-wide team from an existing team or starting from scratch. Users cannot remove themselves from org-wide teams. However, we do want to eliminate some resource accounts that may have crept into the list of users in an org-wide team. We have that capability. We can manage teams. There's a Teams overview grid, so at a glance, we can see a list of all teams, active users, whether the team is archived, whether it's deleted. Remember, we have soft delete, so we can recover within 30 days. And we can search for teams as well. We can edit things like the profile, the team members, settings pertaining to conversations and channels. We can manage the channels. Associated PowerShell commandlets include set team and remove team. Some of the settings around teams pertain to who can add and edit channels, adding, editing, and removing tabs, and apps. There are user roles for a team. We have the owner and member, and optionally the moderator role. You can see there's a fair amount of overlap between what team owners can do and team members can do. Some key distinctions, though. Only team owners can create, edit the team name, and delete a team. Also, only owners can add members and delete private channels. Again, we can manage membership from 3 places: Teams Admin Center, Teams Client, and PowerShell. Dynamic membership is a different way to define members in a team. Instead of manually adding or removing members, we define one or more rules to denote membership. For example, the city or the role or the rank or title. We can get as specific as we want, but it's the rules that determine membership. We cannot manually add or remove members if we use dynamic membership. We could use the Admin Center, Azure AD Admin Center, or PowerShell. And again, at least one rule must be defined to populate using dynamic membership. We have the ability to archive a team. We could restore it if need be. We could delete the team permanently. PowerShell commandlet to use is remove team. If we need to restore a deleted team, we would use the restore Azure ADMS deleted directory object commandlet. From PowerShell, we could also permanently delete a team. Let's say we didn't want to wait for the 30 days to elapse. We could simply permanently delete. When we choose the archive option, we can choose to make all SharePoint content read-only at that time. Next up, managing collaboration experiences for chat and channels. There are two types of channels, public and private. Private channels are viewable only to channel members, and you can create as many private channels as you want. Sometimes, though, it makes sense to create a separate team rather than just a private channel within a team. Depends on the number of distinct topics you need to discuss. And we can always add new channels, delete channels, even restore a deleted channel. Who gets to create private channels? Well, we can specify this with the Teams Admin Center or with PowerShell using the set CS Teams channel policy commandlet with the allow private channel creation switch set to false. CS refers to communication server, an older name for what turned into Teams. At the team level, we can use the Teams client to manage private channel creation. Configuring team settings, lots of slider options to consider. It's easy to switch the slider, it takes more effort to decide which slider to use for different reasons. Let's discuss. The first one is suggested feeds can appear in a user's activity feed, yes or no? I can make an argument either way. Often the targeting is so good that it distracts me from the work I'm supposed to do. So on the one hand, I like what's being surfaced. On the other hand, it can be a distraction. You have to decide what's best for you. You can allow for tagging and associated @ mentions. You can mention someone by name. Email integration. You could allow emails to be sent to a channel email address, and then it's a rather long email address. You can configure an alias for it so users can simply easily find the email alias for a Teams channel and send an email to it. You may or may not want to enable cloud file storage, and you have options for Citrix, Dropbox, Box, Google Drive, and Ignite. You may want to reveal the org chart as a tab. That's a switch there as well. And you could require a secondary form of authentication to access meeting content. This is if you're using Surface Hub devices. More on Surface Hub later in the course. You could require a content pin to make sure that users can only see their own meeting content and not other meeting content. And whether or not you want to allow Surface Hub accounts to send email. There is a search by name option you could enable as well. To create and manage messaging policies, we could assign, modify, or delete policies. The PowerShell commandlets to use are, or include, new CS Teams messaging policy or grant CS Teams messaging policy. Policy choices to make. Can owners delete sent messages? Can users delete or edit their sent messages? Are read receipts enabled? Are you going to enable chat? If so, what about jiffies, memes, stickers? Do you want to reveal URL previews? Do you want message translation? Do you want to enable priority notification for urgent messages? Do you want to enable voice messages? And do you want to enable suggested replies? Also, you have the ability to remove users from group chats. Channel moderation is optional. With channel moderation, you can allow for messages submitted by bots and connectors. Some choices to make. Who gets to start a new post? Everyone or everyone except guests? Some other options there. Can members pin channel messages? Can members reply to channel messages? Next up is managing apps for Microsoft Teams. There are all kinds of Microsoft apps, third-party apps, custom apps you may develop in-house. Relating to the Microsoft bot framework, various web technologies like HTML5, SharePoint framework, Power Platform, GitHub, Visual Studio, Microsoft Graph. So you can manage apps for your organization in the admin center. You have control over app policies. Should users be able to upload custom apps? Are you going to allow Power Platform apps, Power Virtual Agent apps, and org level app settings as well? You could only allow, for example, apps published by certain publishers, maybe certain versions of apps. This relates to security and compliance as well. Some apps are free, some there is a per user charge. You could also block specific apps here. You could add apps to individual teams. You could customize them in some way. There are also org-wide app settings, again, whether to allow third-party apps and or custom apps. There are app permission policies you can create and manage from the Teams Admin Center or PowerShell. You have separate choices for Microsoft apps versus third-party apps and apps specific to your tenant. There are app setup policies you could use, and you can highlight based on the app's position, their icon in the left rail. You could highlight different apps by pinning them. You can manage custom app uploads at the org-wide level or the team level or the user level. So it's not one size fits all. You could have an app only in use for one specific team in your entire organization. And you can also publish custom apps to Microsoft Teams. There are various distribution methods you could use. If you publish to the Teams App Store at appsource.microsoft.com, those apps are available to everyone. If you publish to the tenant apps catalog, the apps are available to all users in your organization only. Side loading is another option for use with developers. We can customize the App Store from the Teams Admin Center. We can create our own App Store page. We can customize it with organizational colors and background and logo. And now I'll demo Teams and collaboration settings, showing you how to manage team resources, configure channel and messaging policies, manage app settings, and then test out those configured policy settings.
All right. We need to modify the IT department M365 group. We're going to add Teams features to it. So we're signed in as Joni Sherman. We are going to join or create a team, create team from a group or team, specifically an M365 group, the IT department group. We'll create, and then we'll choose the ellipsis, those three dots, and choose to manage the team. Team owner there, Joni Sherman, and we've got guests Alan DeYoung and Alex Wilbur. So we've created a new team with a Teams desktop client by leveraging an existing M365 group. Now we'll create a team using PowerShell. The team will be called CA Office. First, we'll sign in with Joni Sherman's credentials after running the Connect Microsoft Teams commandlet. We'll run the new team commandlet. Make the visibility public for the CA Office team. Now we'll add Alex Wilbur to the group. And add Alan DeYoung to the group as well. We'll create a channel called Support now. And another channel called Recruiting. And we'll create a private channel called Administration. And we'll disconnect from Teams. Now signed in as Joni. We can see a private channel called Administration underneath the CA Office team. So we've successfully created a team named CA Office with Alex and Alan as members and Joni the owner. We didn't specify an owner in the PowerShell commandlet. It was run in the context of Joni. So she was added as an owner automatically. And we created a couple of public channels and a private channel as well. Now let's create a team using the Graph API. We're going to create a new team called Early Adopters with minimal settings, like a public join option, and another team with multiple existing channels called Tech Meetings. So we're at the Graph Explorer. That's at developer.microsoft.com/graph/graph-explorer. We're going to sign in as Joni Sherman. The upper left, there's a button there. And we're looking at permissions now. Specifically the teams.create permission. We're going to consent to the use of that. Now we'll go to the request body. Paste in relevant syntax about early adopters. And run query. And that's accepted. Now we'll create a tech meetings team. And a welcome hall channel and other channels as well. Now we will archive and unarchive a team. So we're back in the Teams admin center as Joni Sherman. From the teams on the left side pane, we'll choose Manage Teams and archive the sales teams by selecting Sales and Archive from the top pane. And then we'll make the SharePoint site read-only for team members and choose Archive. Now we can see the archive status in orange. Let's check the archive team. Signed in as Lynn Robbins. We'll go in the archived section and choose the sales team. And then sales shows up under the hidden teams section. If we go to the general channel under the sales team, you can see that the new conversation option is not available. So let's unarchive the sales team from the admin center. Choose unarchive. And now the status field will change to active again. We can choose the three dots from the right of the sales team and choose Show. Now we've successfully archived a team and reviewed the limited functionality of archived teams. Now we'll delete one of the teams created. So from the three dots to the right of the sales team, we'll choose Delete the Team and confirm that I understand everything will be deleted and delete team. What if I change my mind? I can restore the group from the Azure AD Admin Center. Azure Active Directory, deleted groups. You can see the sales group there. And select the checkbox and restore group. I would say trust but verify. Let's go back as Lynn Robbins here in the team's client. And we can see the sales team appearing again. And that we can see the members of the team have been restored as well. So now we've successfully deleted a team with the team's web client and restored it with the Azure AD portal. Let's now manage team members with dynamic membership. Back from the Azure AD Admin Center, Azure Active Directory and groups. Get to the CA Office group. Properties. The membership type will go from assigned to dynamic user. We'll add a dynamic query. The property will be account enabled equals true. And we'll add another expression, usage location equals CA. And we'll click Save twice. We get a warning about dynamic membership rules. We'll say yes. Let's click on Overview now, and we'll see the membership processing status field. After a few minutes, that field will reveal Update Complete. Then we can choose Members and refresh, and now we can see Alex Wilbur is in the list of members, and also that Alan DeYoung has been removed. We'll go to Owners, and we can still see Joni is the owner of the group, even though she does not match the dynamic group criteria. So we've converted an M365 group from static or assigned to dynamic. Membership is controlled by the usage location of the user and if the account is enabled. Any user with the usage location Canada is auto-added to the team. Now we'll configure channel and message policies to manage the creation of new private channels and the available tools for users in chat, starting with creating a messaging policy for Jiffies, memes, and stickers. So from the Teams Admin Center, we're signed in as Joni. Left nav, we'll choose messaging policies, add, and we're going to add a name. Regular users without fun stuff. The description is policy to disable Jiffies, stickers, and memes in conversations. So we'll turn off Jiffies, memes, and stickers and leave the rest of the settings at default and hit save. Now we'll choose the check mark next to regular users without fun stuff and manage users. And we'll add Alex, Lynn, and Diego to the policy. And it can take up to 24 hours for settings to take effect. Next, we'll manage private channels in a team. So we'll choose Teams, Manage Teams, and the Sales Team and Channels tab. And we'll add private channel. We'll call this Confidential Sales. Confidential Private Sales Channel. Type of private. And the channel owner is Lynn Robbins. And apply. Now we'll check the private channel from the Teams web client. Now we can see a new private channel called Confidential Sales with a small padlock icon. Next, we'll manage app settings by disabling third-party storage providers. We want the users to use OneDrive and SharePoint as primary data storage locations and have Box as an alternative for all file collaborations. So we're going to deactivate all the other third-party storage providers except for Box. So team settings, we'll go to the Files section and turn off Citrix Files, Dropbox, and Google Drive and Ignite. Now we'll edit the default org-wide app policy. The company wants to add tasks by Planner and To-Do as the default app for all existing teams by editing the default org-wide app policy. We'll go under Teams Apps and Setup Policies, Global, Pinned Apps, and Add Apps. We'll select Global and search Planner. We'll see the Tasks by Planner and To-Do app. Click Add twice, and now we'll see Tasks by Planner and To-Do is listed in the Pinned Apps section. And choose Save. Then we'll edit the default app permission policy. Again, from Teams Apps, Manage Apps, we'll type Google and highlight Google Analytics. So we're going to block that from the top menu and block again. Now we'll manage policy packages. To avoid the administrative overhead of managing large numbers of policies individually, To avoid the administrative overhead managing large numbers of policies individually for groups of different users, we'll evaluate using policy packages to group policies into logical units. So we'll review the default policy packages and change a default policy package for first-line workers. So under policy packages, we'll choose the frontline worker policy package, and we'll edit. And we're going to turn on the setting of send urgent messages using priority notifications and click save. Then we're going to choose a calling policy for frontline workers. We're going to prevent toll bypass and send calls through the PSTN. And change the busy on busy is available when in a call to enabled. Then click save and choose back to go to the policy packages overview. Make sure the frontline worker policy package is checked and choose manage users from the top menu. We'll choose Alan DeYoung and apply. Choose users from the left side pane, and then Alan DeYoung. And the policies tab. And below, assign policies. We can see the policies assigned from the frontline worker policy package. So we've successfully modified policies from an existing policy package and assigned the package to a single user. So this will help you assign the same set of policies to a group of users working in the same role or requiring the same access. Now we'll build a flow using Power Automate in Teams. So we'll create the IT support org-wide team. We'll create a team from scratch, an org-wide team, and call it IT support and click create. Now we're going to create a form from office.com/launch/forms, signed in as Joni Sherman. We'll click new form. We'll call this one submit a ticket. And we'll say, please provide the information. In the description field, our member from IT department will contact you as soon as possible. Then add new and text, entering what is the issue. Now we'll install Power Automate in Teams from teams.microsoft.com. Go into Apps and Power Automate. Choose that and add. Now we'll create a flow. So we'll choose Power Automate from the left nav. And create. The template will be notify when let's start over. We'll choose the template called notify a team when a new forms response is submitted. Call this flow report issue. And next. And we'll choose the submit a ticket form. We're going to notify the IT department. Channel will be general. Then create flow. And done. Now we'll add the form to the general channel of the IT support team. We'll add a tab and select Forms from the Add a Tab window. We'll select Add an existing form and Submit a ticket. And save. And in the general channel of the IT support team, we'll choose the Fill/Submit a Ticket tab and type in the issue. I need help to create a team for external partners, and click Submit. And from the General tab of the IT department team, we'll see a post via Power Automate. So now we've successfully created a flow from Power Automate in Teams, which will notify members of the IT department when users submit a request ticket. Let's test configured policy settings. So we'll test them on a client with Lynn Robbins compared to the settings available to Joni Sherman. So we'll test messaging policy and private channel access. Sign in as Lynn Robbins. We'll click the new chat icon. We'll choose Joni Sherman to start the conversation. And we have no Jiffies, memes, or stickers icons available as expected, although we do have an emojis button.
This concludes part 1. Let's recap all the content we've seen so far. In Module 1, we explored Microsoft Teams Admin Center and PowerShell as part of planning and deploying Microsoft Teams, and examined Teams lifecycle management and governance. In Module 2, we discussed different levels of external access as well as security and compliance settings for Microsoft Teams. We also looked at crucial network settings you need to know before deploying Teams. And in Module 3, we saw several ways to create and manage Teams, as well as allowing for different kinds of chat and channel collaboration. Finally, we looked at how you can extend Teams capabilities using apps. Thank you for your attendance so far, and we look forward to seeing you next time for part 2 of this Microsoft 365 Virtual Training Day. Enable hybrid work with Microsoft Teams.
Hello and welcome to this virtual session. We're glad you can join us today. Before we get started, there's a few housekeeping items we'd like to go over with you now. Firstly, you can resize the webinar windows to cater to your viewing preferences. You can maximize, minimize, and drag the windows to your preferred viewing size. If you look at the bottom middle of your screen, you can click on the widgets that you'll need to get the most out of this virtual experience. Secondly, Microsoft specialists are on hand to answer your questions in real time. So feel free to type in your questions using the Q&A window and we'll answer them as soon as we can. Lastly, we've provided some additional resources for you to supplement your learning. You can access them by clicking on the links in this section. Without further ado, I'll hand over to our speakers.
Welcome back to part 2 of this Microsoft 365 Virtual Training Day. Enable hybrid work with Microsoft Teams. In this part of the event, we start with Module 4, Manage Meetings and Virtual Events in Microsoft Teams. We wrap up the event with Module 5, Manage Calling in Microsoft Teams. In Module 4, we'll explore meetings, webinars, and virtual events, and conclude with a look at some of the many Teams devices. Let's get started with Module 4. And now manage meetings and virtual events in Microsoft Teams. Starting with experiences. The new experience is Teams webinars, where we can have custom attendee registration. It ties in nicely with Dynamics 365 marketing. We've had Teams meetings for years, one-to-one, group meetings, enabling chats, sharing, and collaboration, and Teams live events. Useful use case there, company town halls, up to 20,000 people. Typically, you're going to have multiple people involved in the event, not just the presenter, but the producer role as well. Maybe you're using some third-party hardware or software to help with production. So qualitatively different, each of these, meetings, webinars, and live events. Meetings have a maximum of 1,000 people. We can have breakout rooms in meetings, chat, video, we can share, we can enable apps for meetings, and they can be channel meetings, private meetings. Here's what a webinar looks like. So again, a custom attendee registration page is available. We can have branding, logos, backgrounds, and email confirmations. We can even restrict attendance based on answers to some pre-webinar questions. And roles. So we have an organizer role, someone that sets up the virtual event in the first place. A producer, someone has to switch between feeds. Let's say we have multiple presenters around the world. Someone has to designate the live feed at any given time. And then we have one or more presenters and, of course, attendees. We're not required to use any third-party hardware or software, but we could. For example, some third-party providers, some content delivery network options there. So the idea is we want to get a quality feed to as many people as possible, up to 20,000, even from disparate locations around the world. So the idea with content delivery network providers, we want to get the video feed as close as possible to large groups of users so that they have minimum round-trip latency and the best experience viewing the virtual event. We can use Azure Media Services to help with production, and either Azure's content delivery network or a third-party enterprise content delivery network provider. There are various meeting settings we can use. Do we want to allow for anonymous users to access, or do we want to use email invitations, and then we can customize those invitations as well? We can configure these settings from the Teams Admin Center. We can have special URLs for our logo, our legal disclaimer. Very helpful to have a help URL. Users can click a link and get help if they have trouble joining the virtual event, for example, and a footer. Also, we can preview the invite. Super helpful. We may think we've got everything just so, and then we might notice in the preview that, oh, we made a typo. So it's good to correct that before it goes out to everyone else. We can also specify port ranges. We looked at port ranges earlier. So the default port ranges for audio, 50,000 to 50,019. Video, 50,020 to 50,039. And screen sharing, default ports, 50,040 to 50,059. There are many meeting policies we can create and manage as well. Do we want to have meet now in channels? So I can make an argument either way. Do you want people focused on the meeting content or be able to have side conversations? Do you want to allow an Outlook add-in? This is helpful because that way you can schedule meetings right from within Outlook. You can allow for scheduling of private meetings. For audio and video, you can choose whether or not to allow for IP video, and if so, a media bit rate in kilobits per second. For recording and transcription, do you want to allow transcription? Do you want to allow recording to the cloud? And the default is off for the ability to store recordings outside your country or region. You may want to enable that. For content sharing, the screen sharing mode, is it the entire screen? Is it an application? Can any participant request control or give control? Does this apply to external participants as well? Do you want to allow for PowerPoint sharing, whiteboards? For participants and guests, can anonymous people start a meeting? And who has presenter rights in meetings? Could be everyone, for example. That could get chaotic. Do you want to automatically admit people? If so, just people in your organization or guests too? Or do you want them to wait in the lobby and then someone has to manually let those people in? And then what about for people phoning in, those dial-in users? Should they get to bypass the lobby? Yes or no? You could enable live captions. And again, you could allow chat in meetings. The meeting policies could apply to organizer, and then all the participants would inherit the policy assigned to the organizer. Or we could have policies assigned per user, or both, per user and per organizer. A lot of flexibility there. For audio conferencing, do you want to enable users to phone in? Not everyone can be in front of their computer or tablet, say, for a meeting. Maybe they're on the road and they can dial in, but they're unable to look at a screen. So in this case, where do they call? Do they all call the US from anywhere in the world, or do you have some numbers that are local to where your users are? If you have enough users in a given area, it makes sense to have a local number to call, even a toll-free option. You have choices there. And then you have choices with language settings for the prompts and conference bridge settings as well. Do you require a PIN to join the meeting? For audio conference, you can set up bridges, again, toll or toll-free. If needed be, you can change the default conference bridge number. And you can assign dial-in phone numbers for users as well. For the bridge settings, do you want meeting entry and exit notifications? Again, if it's a large meeting, I would say no, because do you really want to hear the name or phone number of everyone joining the meeting? Probably not. If it's a small meeting, maybe that's okay. If so, do you want users to record their name before joining a meeting? For live events, you can configure a support URL, optionally use a third-party distribution provider, in which case you'll need a license key. And we can configure live event settings, you guessed it, from the Teams Admin Center and PowerShell using the commandlet set CS Teams meeting broadcast configuration. If we're using a third-party video distribution provider, we provide the name, a license key, and the API template URL for that provider. Live events policies, you can allow for scheduling, whether or not transcription is required. You can restrict who gets to join live events, who can record the live event. So in terms of who gets to join, your choices are everyone in the organization, or even specific users or groups. For your recording options, you can always record, never record, or leave that choice up to the organizer. What is Microsoft 365? What are the different ways or different apps in use when we're producing live events? Well, the organizer can schedule the event in Stream, Yammer, or Teams. We can produce right from within Teams or with a third-party device, so an RTMP device, that's real-time messaging protocol. To go live, we have a producer role. Again, that producer can work in Stream, Yammer, or Teams. For cloud delivery, We can take advantage of Azure Media Services or a content delivery network, possibly a third-party CDN provider. And then the audience can watch using Stream, Yammer, or Teams. Let's turn our attention now to configuring and managing Teams devices. First, we need to plan for Teams rooms deployments. So we'll have a different strategy depending on the room size and what the use is for the room. Maybe we want to get a few standard installation types so we don't have to keep planning every time there's some new space we want to utilize. And we can get some consistency across various offices if we're, say, a multinational organization. And we can standardize configuration. We can create cabling diagrams and train people as needed as well. You can see three main phases on the slide here: the envision phase, the onboard phase, and the drive value phase. A few of the meeting room types: maybe it's a meet and present room. A lot of organizations are demanding flexible environments now where wheels are underneath tables and chairs, so you can easily move the room around. And for the meet and present room types, presentations, discussions are featured, and everyone can see and interact with shared content. Another space type is meet and co-create. So this could be mobile as well, the device. So we've got a Surface Hub there on wheels. We could combine those, so meet and present and meet and co-create. And again, flexibility is key. To help you decide on what hardware to buy for Microsoft Teams, well, what kind of furniture is in the room? Do you already have existing AV equipment? Are the walls bare? Are they reflective? In other words, glass? Is there a lot of sound absorbing material in the room? Carpet, ceiling tiles, soft furniture? What about lighting? Do you have issues with sunlight? Do you need additional lighting? And what is the camera going to see, or cameras that you put in the room? And how are cables going to get to the various devices? Under the floor and the ceiling, or are they trip hazards, the cables? So that all needs to be thought through. Another questions to ask: what's the goal of the room? Is there an actual whiteboard or digital whiteboard? Do you have issues with AC in terms of noise? Not to mention heating and cooling. Do you have the ability to automatically lower shades or turn on a projector? If you're planning on mounting a display on the wall, can that wall support the display weight? Some of the devices you might want to consider: Teams displays, desk phones, headphones, speakerphone pucks that are microphones as well. And various devices, you've got your sound bars. You can combine audio and video devices. Those are integrated devices all in one, like a Surface Hub. So depending on your room purpose, this will lead you towards one of the other choices. Teams Rooms devices are available across a wide variety of form factors. So modular systems, they have a center of room touch panel control, so you can manage the meeting without leaving your seat, and AV peripherals like speakers, mics, and cameras. These systems provide maximum flexibility, so you can scale up or down to meet any room size. Integrated systems bring the speakers, mics, cameras, and computer together into a single compact device, easy to deploy, simple to manage. Because of their size and simplicity, these generally work well for smaller spaces like focus rooms or small meeting spaces. Teams Rooms can also be experienced through an all-in-one device with a Surface Hub. The Surface Hub is a Windows 10 device that brings together a camera, far-field microphones, speakers, and a brilliant 4K touch screen. Surface Hub comes in two sizes, 50-inch and 85-inch. It can be mounted on the wall or paired with a steel case mobile stand and APC-charged mobile battery. While much of the core meeting experiences across these form factors are consistent, there are some key differences important to consider. The Teams Rooms experience, built for modular and integrated systems, is focused on high-quality audio and video experiences and content sharing. We call this meet and present. Often, though not a rule, these meetings are more formal in nature and happen around a table where most people are seated. The Teams Rooms experience delivered on the Surface Hub is geared toward meetings where the focus is on people needing to meet, ideate, or brainstorm as a team. We call this meet and co-create. Because these meetings tend to be less formal, there may be more movement around the space with people standing around the collaboration surface. Most organizations have a blend of spaces designed to support different kinds of meetings. Microsoft Teams Rooms offers a variety of form factors to ensure we can meet the needs of every kind of meeting and space. We're looking now at a medium conference room option. Maybe you're going to have a Surface Hub there, and then also a focus huddle space. Single display, dual display, both supported. Here's the Surface Hub. Again, all in one configuration. The newest member of the Surface Hub family is Surface Hub 2S. In addition to what we've already talked about, there are tools we can use to manage Surface Hub. You may be using Microsoft Endpoint Manager or a mobile device management solution like Intune. We could use Windows Update for Business and also put apps on Surface Hub using Microsoft Store App Management. It runs the Windows 10 TeamOS, support for Teams, of course, Whiteboard, Office 365, Edge web apps, and, as mentioned, Microsoft Store apps. We need to set up resource accounts in M365 for Teams Rooms. These are accounts dedicated to specific resources like a room or a projector or other piece of equipment. A couple of licensing options for Teams meeting rooms. We've got our standard and premium offering. The standard offering gives us Microsoft Teams, phone system, audio conferencing, and Microsoft Intune support. With premium, you're getting a managed service, so Microsoft can help you with your room planning and rollout, update and inventory management. They can proactively monitor and troubleshoot 24/7, 365, and customer support is available as well. We can set up remote provision and sign-in for new devices based on device's MAC address. We get a verification code, which we would enter at the device. We can add MAC addresses manually or upload multiple MAC addresses in a CSV file. Here's what remote provision looks like and sign in for new devices. So we look at initial screens here. We can enter the device account, give it a friendly name and a device name, set up admins for the device screen, and also there's an admin account screen. To manage Teams rooms, we can use the Teams Admin Center or Microsoft Endpoint Manager, or if we're leveraging Teams Room Managed Services, 3 different interfaces for Teams Rooms management. Again, we can delegate device management to Microsoft Managed Services. So this requires a premium license. You need to be a global admin when you first log into the portal. There might be some firewall and proxy settings to alter on your end. And it gives you round-the-clock monitoring and operations and incident management, even ServiceNow export, and delegated partner access. There's a free trial for 90 days supporting up to 100 devices. You can get that from rooms.microsoft.com/premium. You need to be signed in as a global admin to request the trial. There are various roles and permissions you can assign to individual users or security groups. 3 default roles. You can have your own roles as well. An example there on the slide, New York site leads, access and view rooms in New York. More restrictive still, New York Building 1 technicians can only see a segment of those rooms. If you're a managed service administrator, you have access to all rooms and full permissions. You can add rooms to the managed service. Again, this may require changes to firewall or proxy settings. First, you download the installer and a key, read the installation guide, and then place the installer and key on the Teams room. And you go to the new room and click Enroll to add that room to the managed service. Incidents with the managed service. You can use this to raise questions or report problems to the managed service engineers. And then you can see what Microsoft's doing to resolve your problem. And you get info about how critical the incident is as well. You can follow up on incidents with the managed service by going to Incidents and then choosing the incident you want to get details about. To manage devices in Microsoft Teams, you need to be a global admin, Teams admin, or Teams device admin, and this lets you do things like manage phones, collaboration bars, displays, panels. You can change configuration or policies. You can add tags, which are metadata. You can check out the device history, run some diagnostics, restart devices, or apply software or firmware updates. We can also check out meeting activity and view meeting details in Teams rooms, check out the utilization ratio of a given room. And we can have configuration profiles so we can have some consistency in how we configure various devices, device-specific settings, network settings, general settings, including, do we want to display a screensaver? Do we want to have the screen time out after X number of seconds or minutes? What should the backlight brightness be? Do we need high contrast displays? What are the office hours? Do we want to enable power saving? And network settings, do we want to DHCP enable the IP phone, for example? If not, then we can specify the IP address settings. There are Microsoft Teams device tags. For example, you can assign the corporate tag to both phones and Teams Rooms devices. And then if you search for the corporate tag, if you're in devices, phones, then only phones are returned. If you search for the corporate tag in devices, Team Rooms, only Teams Rooms devices are returned. To manage device tags, you need to be a global admin, Teams service admin, or Teams device admin. Troubleshooting Teams Rooms. Despite being a reliable self-managed system, issues can pop up in Teams Rooms. Here's some common scenarios and how to troubleshoot them. What if the Teams Room app is not up to date? Well, in that case, you should sign into Windows settings as an admin and manually update the app via the Microsoft Store. If that doesn't work, you can use the Microsoft Teams recovery tool. Another issue, if the resource account can't sign into Microsoft Teams, then you should sign into Windows settings as an admin and attempt to sign into Teams through the web browser. If you can't, then the account either has a wrong password or maybe there's a typo in the username. What about some common video display issues? If the video image is blurry, the colors are inaccurate, or it just doesn't look right, make sure you're using high-quality HDMI cables and verify that those cables are tightly connected and that the cable hasn't come loose. Inspect the cable to make sure it isn't broken or damaged. You may need to update firmware on the compute module or update the video driver. Verify that the front of room displays don't have burn-in or they're simply old and don't show a strong image anymore. If the displays don't turn on automatically, all displays should support either HDMI, Consumer Electronic Council, or PC power-on commands. Teams Rooms supports HDMI CEC, but many of the compute modules don't, meaning the HDMI ports on compute modules are not pinned correctly to send the CEC signal. In this case, you may need to add a CEC injector. What if the video is choppy or low res, or the resource account keeps signing in and out, or audio has echoes, stutters, or drops? In that case, make sure you're bypassing the proxy server and verify the appropriate firewall ports are open for Microsoft Teams. Do not use wireless networking because it's unsupported with Teams Rooms. If you're using wireless networking, switch to a physical Ethernet cable. When signed in to Windows settings as admin, go to connectivity.office.com from the web browser and validate that the results don't show any network issues with connecting to M365. Check the cabling and switch port and other networking components, making sure that the network cable isn't loose or damaged. Validate that the network switch port hasn't been misconfigured. If necessary, enable quality of service on your network for Teams Media. What are some possible general issues like poor performance? This is usually to do with unnecessary Intune or GPO settings being applied to Teams Rooms. Be sure that the Teams Rooms computer account and resource account are in dedicated OUs and block inheritance of other GPOs. Uninstall unnecessary or redundant antivirus and malware software, VPN clients, and additional security agents not required on Teams Rooms. Be sure Teams Rooms is restarting every night. And update the BIOS and firmware on the compute module to make sure that there aren't any core hardware issues. Now I'll show you how to manage meetings and virtual events experiences and deploy Teams device profiles.
Now let's explore Teams meetings experiences. Starting with managing live event and meetings experiences, we're going to edit the default meeting policy and restrict all recording features for meetings as part of our pilot project. So we'll go under meetings, meeting policies. We'll edit the global org-wide default policy. We're going to turn off allow cloud recording and save. Then we'll test the meeting policy for restricting recording. Signed in as Lynn Robbins to the Teams web client. We'll go into Calendar and choose Meet Now, Start Meeting, and Join Now. We'll choose the ellipsis for more actions. And notice we cannot select Start Recording. Now we'll configure meeting settings and restrict anonymous users from joining meetings. From the Teams Admin Center, we'll go into Meetings, Meeting Settings, and we're going to choose the anonymous users can join a meeting to off and hit Save. Next up, we'll create a new live event policy and restrict recording capabilities. So we'll go under Meetings and the Live Events Policies. We'll choose Add. We'll call this policy Management Live Events. We're going to have a recording restriction for live events organized by managers. We'll change the Who Can Record option to the Organizer Can Record and hit Save. Now we'll select the Management Live Events policy and choose Manage Users from the top menu. And choose Lynn Robbins. And apply. So we've successfully created a custom live event policy and assigned it to a user. Next up, we'll create a webinar. Back in the Teams web client, we'll choose Joni Sherman. Back in the web client logged in as Joni Sherman, we'll choose Calendar and then New Meeting and Webinar. Title is IT Office Hours. A couple of optional attendees. Oops, scratch that. Some required presenters we'll add. Scratch that again. We'll have optional presenters, Patty and Alan. We'll view the registration form. You can see there's fields for time and the ability to register for the event. We'll have some custom questions as well. You can say, what is your question about the new reporting system? And now I've successfully registered for the event with my own question. Next up is deploying Teams device profiles. So we can have different configuration profiles for different Teams devices in our organization. So we're going to choose under devices, IP phones. Signed in as Patty Fernandez now, the Teams device administrator. And configuration profiles tab, we'll choose add. We'll call this profile New York Teams desk phones. And we'll have settings like the device lock is on with a 30-second timeout. We've got a 6-digit PIN, language and time zone and date settings as well, time settings. And under device settings, we'll have those on with a 1-minute timeout. We're going to use high contrast. And office hours will be from 800 to 1700. We're going to enable power saving. Under network settings, DHCP enabled. no logging enabled, and the device's default admin password. We'll enter and click Save. So we've successfully created a configuration profile that can be applied to Microsoft Teams devices. Let's create now a Microsoft Teams room. So we've ordered devices for Microsoft Teams rooms. We want to make sure the prerequisites for equipment installation are being completed. One of those prereqs is adding a device account and assigning an Office 365 license for that account. We'll need to use the Exchange Online PowerShell to complete this task. So that means we first have to install the Exchange PowerShell module. From the M365 Admin Center, we will create an M365 resource account for Teams. Going under Show All Resources and Rooms and Equipment, click on Add. Resource type of room, New York Teams Room 1 is the name, and the email will be New York Teams Room 1 at .microsoft.com. We'll click Save and edit booking options. We're going to allow repeated meetings. We're going to automatically decline meetings outside of the limits. We'll also auto-accept meeting requests. Now we need to provision Microsoft Teams Room standard trial licenses. So under Billing, we'll choose Purchase Services, and the search box on the right, we'll choose Meeting Room. In the Collaboration and Communication section, under the Microsoft Teams Room standard tile, we'll choose Details and Start Free Trial. And the checkout page, we will try now, and then Continue. Finally, we'll assign the license to the Teams Room account. So under Users, Active Users, we'll choose the New York Teams Room 1 account. And then Licenses and Apps tab. And Microsoft Teams Room Standard. And save changes. So now we've successfully created, configured, and licensed a Microsoft Teams Room service account, which is a prerequisite for deploying a Microsoft Teams Room system.
In Module 4, we examine meetings, webinars, and virtual events before looking at various devices from small headsets to Surface Hubs. We'll now take a 10-minute break. See everyone back here then, when we'll get started with Module 5, Manage Calling in Microsoft Teams.
And we'll choose First Play a Greeting Message, Add a Greeting Message. Thank you for your call. Our business hours are Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And then route the call will be disconnect. And next, and we could optionally set up holiday call settings in advance, but we won't. The Find People page, we'll hit Next. And Resource Accounts, we'll click Add. This will be the Contoso Auto Attendant. And we'll click Add twice. And Submit. So now we've successfully created a resource account for the auto attendant and created an auto attendant configuration.
This concludes our Microsoft 365 Virtual Training Day. Enable hybrid work with Microsoft Teams. Let's recap all the content you've seen. In Module 1, we explored Microsoft Teams Admin Center and PowerShell as part of planning and deploying Microsoft Teams, and examined Teams lifecycle management and governance. In Module 2, we discussed different levels of external access, as well as security and compliance settings for Microsoft Teams. We also looked at crucial network settings you need to know before deploying Teams. In Module 3, we saw several ways to create and manage Teams, as well as allowing for different kinds of chat and channel collaboration. Finally, we looked at how you can extend Teams capabilities using apps. In Module 4, we examined meetings, webinars, and virtual events, before looking at various devices from small headsets to Service Hubs. Lastly, in Module 5, we examined phone numbers and systems and troubleshooting audio, video, and client issues. Thank you for attending, and we hope you enjoyed these sessions. Remember, there are many ways to continue your learning journey, such as MS Learn, where we offer self-paced learning options, and be sure to check the calendar for more Microsoft Virtual Training Day events.